The first time you open up Photoshop, you will have the choice whether you want to start a fresh new document, which will be just an empty blank canvas, or you can of course open existing images. First, let me show you how to create a new document. We can click on New here in the welcome screen, or we can go to the File New option. Once I select that, I will have presets to choose from, and that you can find under the document type. Now here, as you can see, we have some options for web, mobile and app design, print, like US paper, international paper, and even other options like film and video. But let me just stick to photo, and I'm going to choose one of these standard sizes. I will choose a landscape 5 by 7 inches. By the way, whenever you select one of these standards, you can still make changes to it. So if I want, I can change the size, I can even change the measurement. And then there is an option called resolution, which I'm going to talk in more detail later on. But this is essentially the print quality. And the higher the resolution is, the better your print quality will be, but the smaller the actual size of the printed image will be. The color mode by default is RGB, but we can choose from other options as well. Once again, I'm going to talk about color modes and bit depth in more detail in another video. For now, I'm just going to create this new document and click on OK. And as you can see, it already opened up here in Photoshop. This is the document window, and I can see currently this document is not named. I didn't give it a name when I started, so it's called Untitled One at the moment. Well, I can save it. And the best way of saving your work in Photoshop is to save it as a Photoshop file or Photoshop document. So if I go to File, Save As, that's when I can choose what file format I want to save. I'm going to save it within my working files folder, and I just call this New Document. So you can see the file format is PSD, which stands for Photoshop Document, but I can change the format here at the bottom. Have several other image formats, but the best options for you whenever you work in Photoshop will be to save a Photoshop or a TIFF file, because these can record layer information, and layers, as you will see later on, will be very important whenever you work in Photoshop. Of course, there's other file formats you can save for web or just emailing something. You can save compressed image file formats like JPEG or PNG. Once again, I'm going to talk about these differences later on. For now, I'm just going to save this file, and as you can see now, it's called New Document PSD, and it's saved on my computer. So when you have a new document, you can do all kinds of different things. You can bring in images, you can start combining them, you can retouch them, you can paint, you can even design all kinds of different things. So it's really up to you what you want to use Photoshop for. But in this course, I'm going to walk you step by step through the options you have. So first of all, you can bring in images. The easiest way to do that is by going to File and then choose Place Embedded. In the previous versions, you might just see Place there, but if you have Creative Cloud, you will see Place Embedded. And once you click on that, you will be able to choose a file. I'm going to choose a file from my examples folder, and there I'm going to choose this image, which is a JPEG file, and then I just click on Place. Now once I clicked on Place, it already shows up on my canvas, and it actually tries to fill in the space that I have, but I can always make this smaller or bigger. All you need to do is to hold down Shift and drag one of the corner points to resize. Let's say I want it this size, and then I can click anywhere on the image to move it around. The reason you have to hold down Shift on the keyboard when you are dragging the side of the image is to make sure that you don't start stretching it. Look what happens if I don't hold it down. It might end up completely distorted. So that's why hold down Shift whenever you drag one of the corner points. Now once you are happy with the size and placement, you can press Return or Enter on the keyboard, or you can also click on the Commit Transform icon on the top. So once that happened, now we have this image in our Photoshop document as a layer. You can see here in the Layers panel, it's called Sign. So I can always have it selected, and with the Move tool, the first tool on the toolbar, I can start moving it around. So let's bring in another image just to practice that. I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and then I'm going to choose another image, choose Place. You see again it came in and it fits to the canvas by default, but then I can shift drag it down to the size I want, and then I can press return again to accept the change. Now I have two layers, and I can switch between these layers by clicking on them, and then still using the move tool I can move them around. And you'll see that these images are actually sitting on top of each other, just like printed photographs placed on top of each other. I'm going to talk a lot more about layers, so this is really just a teaser. But apart from creating a new document and placing in images, you can of course just simply open an image straight away, and that way you don't have to create a new document. So if I go to File, Open, I can find any of my images on the computer, and then if I found the one I'm looking for, let's say this one here, I can just click Open, and you see it will open up. Now in this case, the background layer is the image itself. If I want to compare it to the previous document, I can still click on it here on the top, and you can see there the background layer is just empty. It's white, because that's the default color that Photoshop uses to fill in your canvas. So once again, if you know already that you would like to work with an existing image, you just go to File, Open, and then you choose the image, double click on it, will open it straight into Photoshop. Notice that whenever I open a new document, it comes up here on the top. This is called the tab area, and each document that we open or create comes up as a tab, and you can easily switch between them, or you can also see them at the same time if you go to the Window, Arrange options, and here you can find several options like Tile all vertically or Tile all horizontally. We can even choose 3 vertical or 3 up stacked, and then you will see how Photoshop will lay out the 3 documents at the same time. Now of course, if you want to go back to tabbed view, just go again to Window, Arrange, Consolidate all to tabs. There is also another way to opening files, and also to browse and search for files on your computer that you can then use in Photoshop. And the best tool for that is Bridge. It's called Adobe Bridge, and it comes together with Photoshop, even in previous versions, so not just in Creative Cloud. So if I go to File menu, I can actually find Browse in Bridge. If I click on that will open up Bridge, where I can look for all the files that I have on my computer in a much more organized and easier way than just simply using the File Open feature. So here you have several information about these files, like their pixel size, also camera data in case you are working with photographs, and so much more. So from here, all I need to do is to double click on an image, and that will open up again in Photoshop. So if I double click on this, you see again it came in to Photoshop, and now we have 4 documents. In case you don't need a document anymore, all you need to do is to close it. You can use this little X here, or go to the File menu and choose Close. You will see if you have unsaved changes on the document, whenever it has a little asterisk at the end of the tab. So for example here, I can see that these last changes I've done, bringing in these new images in this new document, are not saved. So there's the little asterisk sign. If I go to File, Save, that sign will go away, which means that this document is up to date. So I don't have to worry, it's saved on the hard drive. But as soon as I move one of these images around, you will see that the asterisk sign comes back, just as a way of reminding me that I might need to save this before I'm going to close it. Now that we are familiar with opening files and creating new documents in Photoshop, it's time to get to know the user interface. So we have to learn what are all these things here on the left side, right side, and on the top. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next video. In this video, I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to know about Photoshop's interface. We usually call it Workspace because that's the way you can customize it and save it, which I'm going to also show you in this video. But first of all, let's talk about the main parts of Photoshop. We have the menus on the Then we have the options bar just below it, where you will see all these options for the currently selected tool from the toolbar on the left. Then we have the document window in the middle, and we already talked about the tabs on the top with which you can switch between documents. And then you have the panels on the right. Now some panels might be open, some panels might be collapsed, and some panels might be just icons. So that's like a general overview, but now let's have a closer look at each of these areas. And let me start with tools, because you are going to work with them a lot. So you saw me already using the Move tool, which is the first one here on the options bar. But there's so many other tools here, and some actually hides some additional options. Like this one here, if I click and hold on it, I will see actually the currently selected tool's name, but also I can see that there's many other tools in this set. Once you select that tool, you will be able to tell that the options bar changes, and it will give you the options for that currently selected tool. Like the Content Aware Move tool, by default we'll have the option called Extend, which means if I make a selection of a detail here, and then I click and drag it, it's going to extend that detail and just copy it onto the other part of the image. So it still keeps the original one here. But if I change this option in the options bar, so remember that was the name of this area here on the top. So if I change it to Move and I make another selection, and now I drag this detail, once I click on Accept or press Enter or Return on the keyboard, it's going to not only move it but also remove it from the original position. Photoshop will always remember your last used settings for every tool. So if I next time come back to this tool, it will remember that I use Move. But if you want to reset all the settings for this tool, you can go to this little drop down here and then click on the settings icon and choose Reset Tool. Or you can even choose Reset all the tools in Photoshop. So choosing different options for tools is already a bit of customization, but of course there's so much more you can change within Photoshop. For example, you can change the set of tools that you have or reorder them by using this option here called Edit Toolbar. Now this is only in Creative Cloud, so don't look for it in previous versions. But if you are a Creative Cloud user, once you click on Edit Toolbar, you will see the list of all the different tools. And then if there are a couple of tools that you don't usually work with, you can drag them into the extra tools, like these two marquee tools I just removed. And if I click on Done, now you will see that these won't show up here in the actual category, but it will show up under the additional tools or extra tools category. So that is already a customization. You can also decide whether you want to see two columns or one individual column for the tools, which depends on your screen size you might decide to change. But now let's move on to the document window. So we already talked about the tabs here on the top in the previous video, but then we have these things here called rulers. Now the rulers can be turned on or off from the view menu. So you'll find it here, rulers, and there's a shortcut which is useful to remember. It's Command or Control R. If I press that, you can hide them or show them again very quickly. And you can right click on the rulers to change the measurement. So if I switch to inches, you will see that. If I switch back to pixels, I will see that measurement again. And notice that it starts always from the top left corner, so the countdown starts from there. These rulers will be useful for measuring, of course, and also for creating guides, which I'm going to show you later on. The background color of the document window can be easily changed as well by right-clicking on it. So if you need a darker background, you can choose black, or you can choose brighter if you prefer that, but I'm just going to switch back to default. And the same way actually you can customize the whole interface of Photoshop. So if you want to change the brightness of it, you will have to go to the preferences. And preferences can be found under the Photoshop menu if you are a Mac user. If you are a PC user, you will find it under the Edit menu, somewhere all the way at the bottom here, near keyboard shortcuts. So once we are in preferences, we can choose the category, and in this case we need interface. So let's just click on that, and you'll see that we can very easily switch between different brightness options. I prefer to work with darker colors on the interface. I'm going to stick with this default darker gray color, and I click OK. And then before we move on to the panels on the right, there's one more thing here at the bottom which I would like to mention. This is called the status bar, and by default here you will have document sizes, which will show you file size of the document, which might increase when you start creating layers. But if I want, I can also customize this, and there's some very useful options here like document dimensions. So if I click on that, I will see the pixel size and the resolution of the file. Now here on the right side we have panels, and I already customized this as well, so I changed the panels around. But what you will see by default when you open up Photoshop is the Essentials setup, and that's a standard workspace saved within Photoshop. So if I switch to that, I will get a different set of panels. So this is another very important part that you can customize and make it tailored to whatever type of work you do within Photoshop. So you will see some panels are visible, some panels are hidden behind other panels, and then we have also panels which are just small icons. The panels that we have here on the right are called docked panels, and these are called iconic panels, which I can click on to show and then click again to hide. If I want, I can also create floating panels. All you need to do is to grab a panel by its tab, and then it becomes a floating panel. These floating panels can be moved anywhere, and if I close a panel, by the way, I can always go to the window menu where all the panels are listed to open it back again. So if I click on it, it will remember exactly where it was last time. So if I want to move it further, I can, but I can also either double click on the tab to minimize it, or I can also use this double arrow here to collapse it into an iconic state. When it's an icon, I can make it even smaller by dragging one of the sides of it. And if I want to see it again as a normal panel, I can click on Expand Panel. You can also resize panels. Not all of them, but most of them can be resized. And also every panel will have a panel menu where you will find additional options. Now if I want to dock this panel back, I can drag and drop it here under the other icons. And you will always see a blue line indicating where your panel is going to land. So if I let go, it will become an iconic panel, and I can click on it to open it or collapse it again by clicking on it again. But then I can drag it further here on the other panels, and if I let go there, it will place the panel there. I can even drag it further out to the right edge of my screen, and if I let go, it will create an additional color for this panel, which might be a little bit too much for the color panel. And what I prefer to do is to have as much space as possible for my layers panel, and of course for the document window where I'm going to do my work. So I don't like for the panels to take up too much space. Instead, I prefer to have them as icons. So I'm going to drag these panels here. Libraries can also go there. Adjustments panel can go here as well. And some panels I might not even need, like the styles panels I hardly use. I can right click on it and choose close. But you will see now I have plenty of space for both to work on the image that I'm currently seeing, and also I have plenty of space for layers. And layers panel is probably the most important one to see, so that's why I prefer to have as much space for it as possible. Now once you customize the interface, you can save it as your custom workspace. So if I go to the drop down here on the top right corner, which is the workspace selector, I can see some default options here and some of my custom settings as well. And I can also choose new workspace. That's the way you save your current settings. So I'm just going to call it practice. And apart from the panel locations, you can also make sure that this setup will remember the changes you've done to the toolbar and even to menus and keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to talk about these later on in another video, but for now I'm just going to click save. see that we have the option here on top. So if I want to switch back to another setting or workspace, I say for drawing, I can switch to that. You'll see that the panels will change. Then I can switch back to practice and all the panels and everything will fall back in place the way I've set it up. And that's all you need to know about the interface of Photoshop. But in the next video, I'm going to walk you through how to navigate within documents. So zooming in and out, panning, rotating your view, switching between screen modes, and I promise you will learn lots of useful keyboard shortcuts. Learning the keyboard shortcuts for navigation in Photoshop is essential because these are things you are going to do all the time. So there are actually several ways of zooming in and out. For example, you can select the magnifier tool, or zoom tool, here at the bottom of the toolbar, and then you can click to zoom in, and you can zoom out by holding down the Alt key together with this Option key, and then zoom out that way. Now, you can also click and drag right to zoom in, and drag left to zoom out. So with this one, I can actually zoom close to a point in the image that I'm interested in by clicking on that and dragging to the right. This is called Scrubby Zoom, and it's turned on here in the options bar, but you can always turn it off if you don't like to use that, because if it's turned off and let's say you are zoomed out, so just pull it to zoom out a bit, you can then, without the Scrubby Zoom, you can make a selection of an area that you are interested and zoom close to that part. If you quickly want to zoom out and see again the whole image, you can click on Fit Screen or Fill Screen, with which you will see probably a little bit more, but depending on the image and the aspect ratio, you will also have parts missing from it. Now this is when panning comes in handy. So let's say I want to move right and left within this image. I can use the scrolls at the bottom or even on the right to pan around in the image, but far better than that is using the space bar. If you press and hold space, you can see that I can move in any direction I want. So I'm not limited to go horizontally or vertically, I can do any movement at the same time. Another way to zoom in and out is using a shortcut purely. It's Control or Command plus and minus. So Command plus or Control plus zooms in, and Control or Command minus will zoom out. If you press Command 1, that will zoom to the actual pixel size, which is the 100% zoom ratio. You can see it here at the bottom in the status bar as well. So this means that every pixel from this image is using a pixel on your screen. So just to make sure you know that your screen is also using a specific resolution. In my case, my Cintiq is using a 1600 by 900 pixel resolution. So this image currently is using that resolution when it's in 100% view. And that is probably one of the best ways of viewing the quality of an image, because any further you zoom in, you will start to see pixelation. If you zoom really far in, you will actually see the pixel grid. And of course, the further you zoom out, the less you will see these pixels and the image will start to look more smooth. If you are working with a very big image, you can zoom closer to a detail and at the same time still be able to move quickly to another part of the image by using either a shortcut, which is called Bird's Eye View. You can press and hold H on the keyboard and then click to zoom out, move wherever you want to move within the image, and when you let go, it will zoom back to the previously used zoom ratio. There's also a panel under Window, Navigator, which gives you the same option but without using a shortcut. Here I can very quickly move around the image without zooming out. I have the whole image visible within this panel. Sometimes you might want to rotate your view. I'm just going to zoom out slightly. So rotating the view can be useful whenever you make selections or whenever you need to add text on an angle, for example. So for this, you can switch to the Rotate View tool, which is also a shortcut there, R. So once that's selected, we can click and drag and rotate the whole view. And notice that we have a compass. If I hold down Shift, it will actually snap to these certain degrees or angles. And whenever I decide to turn the image back to the way it was, I just have to press the escape key. Or also you can choose the reset view here on the options bar. There's also a shortcut to quickly hide the panels on the right and your toolbar on the left. That's tab key. If you press tab, that will hide them. And with the same shortcut you can show them once again. If you want to see your toolbar, just hide your panels, you can press shift tab. And then if you press F on the keyboard, that will toggle between different views. So you see now we remove the status bar, and also we have a little bit more space to work on the image. If I press F once more, almost everything disappears and only the image is visible, but we can still work with it. Or I can switch back to the tools by pressing F again, which takes me back to the original normal view. These screen modes can be found at the bottom of the toolbar. So these were the 3 options that I went through. Now that you see that shortcuts are essential in Photoshop because they just save so much time, I would like to also teach you how to customize them, because that's also available. If you go to the Edit keyboard shortcuts, you will be able to customize any feature in Photoshop to have their own customized shortcut. So if I go there, I can find first of all the application menus, so all the menus from the top, or panel menus. Within each panel there's also menus and features, and then of course even the tools can be customized, so you can change the shortcuts here as well. Now one of the things that I change almost straight away if I work on a new computer is the edit step backward and forward. I actually use function keys for it instead of the original Command Alt Z, Command Shift Z shortcut combination, because it's just much faster to use function keys. If you are a PC user, then you can just set this up straight away without any issues. If you are a Mac user, you also have to make sure that under the system preferences, you go to keyboard options. So let me just switch to keyboard, and you make sure you turn on this option. So to use all function keys as standard function keys. That way you can use them in Photoshop on their own to go back and forth. And if you need to use the original change brightness option, which is associated with function 1 and function 2, you can just hold down the function key as it says, the FM key, to use the special features printed on those keys. So let's go back to Photoshop, and you can see that I already customized these, but it's very simple to change a shortcut. You just select it and then press the shortcut you want to assign to it. If you are a Creative Cloud user, you can actually have multiple shortcuts for the same features. So even if I go back to the original set of shortcuts, where I can see the original shortcuts, so step forward or step backward, I can add shortcut to them. So instead of removing the original one, I can add my custom version as well. And for step backward, I can add F1. But now you see, instead of removing the original shortcut, I have a new one assigned. So I can actually have multiple shortcuts for the same features. Why is that useful? Well, in case someone else is using your computer, they wouldn't have to switch back and forth between workspaces to get back to the original shortcuts if they prefer that, but you can share the same computer and use different shortcuts for the same features. So that's all I wanted to show you in this video, but I mentioned some very important thing here, the pixel grid. If you remember, when I used the zoom tool and zoomed closer to the image, after a while we started to see pixels. And this is something I have to make sure you understand, because this relates to resolution and image size. So that's exactly what I'm going to discuss in the next video. Every digital image that's captured with a camera is going to be made up of pixels. These pixels are like small building blocks, which from a distance will give you a very smooth, continuous tone image, but zooming closer to it will reveal all those little building blocks. They will be especially noticeable around curved edges. You will have a more rough edge or little steps. The more pixels you can record in the original image, the better the quality will be, and the more detail you will have on each individual part of the image. That also means you will be able to print the image in a much higher format without starting to see pixelation in the printed image. I zoom a little bit further back, you can imagine that there are a lot of pixels in this image, and this is not even a high resolution image. I would say it's like a normal medium resolution. It's around a full HD video format. But if I go to the image size, I can show you within the image menu we have image size. Once I select that, you will see the pixel size of the dimensions here. So on this image we have 1920 pixels for the width and 1280 pixels for the height. To get the overall amount of pixels, you would multiply these two values together, and that's how you get it. You can imagine that's a lot. We are talking about millions of pixels, and the main aspect of how many pixels you can record with a camera that you need to look for is obviously the megapixel, which is getting higher and higher each year, and now even with cell phones you can record really high resolution images. Of course, the megapixel is not the only thing you need to look for, because the image quality depends on also other factors like the size of the sensor within the camera. But without getting too technical, let me explain another very important aspect, and that is resolution. Now you can see resolution here is set to 300, and you might have heard of 300 dpi or 300 ppi when someone talks about good high quality resolution print. Now this means that if this image is going to be printed, there will be 300 pixels printed on an inch distance. So if I switch here to inches, the measurement, I will actually see exactly how big this is going to be in print. So it will be around 6 by 4 inches, which is not that big. You can see that that's roughly like a postcard size, and although we have millions of pixels in this image, it's still not enough to print like a bigger page format while maintaining a very good high quality print. So 300 ppi or pixel per inch is like an industry standard that you can use. There's also a little bit more lenient one, 240 ppi, which is also considered good quality print. Now, what happens if I change the resolution? Well, if I change the resolution by having the resample on, that will resize the image. So if you don't want to resize, you can turn it off. And that way, if I change this to 240, notice what happened with my print size. It got bigger. Because I have 240 pixels per inch, that means my actual print size can get bigger. Now to show you this, I have another little diagram here. So, for example, that detail within the image will print much bigger if I use 50 ppi or if I use 300 ppi. So if the resolution is set to high number like 300, then on an inch distance, which is 2.54 centimeters, you will have 300 of the pixels from the image printed, while here we will have on the same distance 50 pixels from the original image printed. So you can see reducing the resolution will make your print much bigger, but the quality of the print will drop as well considerably. So going back to our previous example, if I want to see how this image is going to be printed, I can go to the view menu and choose print size, which will give me a rough estimate of how big this image will be once it's printed. Now this is based on my actual screen I'm looking at the moment. So if you look at the recorded version and on your screen, depending on your screen size, it might look different. But whenever you work in Photoshop, this will give you a rough estimate of how big that image is going to be once it's printed. Now if I go to image size and I change the resolution, so I'm just going to turn off resample and I change the resolution to, let's say, 150, and then I click on OK. Then I go back to view menu and choose print size again. You will see that the image will be twice as big. So we'll reduce the resolution to half, then we will get twice as big print size. Now your question might be, can Photoshop resize an image without changing the resolution? Well, yes, it can, but it will always have to resample the image meaning it will have to redistribute all the pixels within the image. So if I go to the image menu and choose image size, I can show you that by having resample turned on, increasing the resolution to 300 will mean the image will have to become much larger, so Photoshop will have to create pixels, and not just a few, but a lot. For this resampling, Photoshop will have to do almost twice as many pixels as there were originally in the image, and you will see the effect that has. It will start to blur the image slightly. So Photoshop won't be able to generate pixels for you, it will estimate them. So I can show you, if I click and hold on the image, that's how the original image was, and when I let go, this is how the resampled version will look like. If I go even higher up, let's just say I need a 50 centimeters wide image, or maybe if we are talking about inches, let's just change it to, I don't know, 15 inches. Then you can see now the pixel size gets even higher, and again I can compare before and after. You can see that the quality will never get better, it will slightly get blurry and not as sharp as before. So don't get confused about resizing images. Photoshop will never be able to create a more detailed image. It will have to create pixels from the original ones and just estimate how those new pixels would look like. So the lesson to learn from this is to try to always work with as high resolution images as possible, but resizing and understanding resolution is not the only thing we have to learn. We might also want to crop images sometimes, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you in the next video. The crop tool in Photoshop is very easy to use, but it's also very versatile because it has many different ways of correcting images. So first of all, this is the crop tool here in the toolbar. You can press C on the keyboard to get it quickly selected. And then once you have the crop tool active, you will see a bounding box around the whole image or the whole canvas. You can drag these corner points around to change the crop. And once you change the crop, you can also click anywhere in the middle to drag the crop rectangle around. There's an option which I prefer to turn off. It's called delete cropped pixels. If you have this turned off, then even if you crop the image, you won't lose all those details outside of the crop rectangle. If I accept this crop by double clicking on the rectangle, I can go back with the crop tool, click on it again, and I can see that all the outside areas are still available. So if I want to again show those parts of the image, I can. So that's a non-destructive way of cropping your images, and I highly recommend to have it turned off most of the time. In case you want to keep a certain aspect ratio on the crop, you can choose that from here in the drop down. So if I want, let's say, a square format, I can just select that, and while having that selected, I can change my crop without affecting its aspect ratio. I can also choose other options here, let's say 5 to 7, portrait format, or 4 to 5, another standard for images, and of course I can change these values around. So toggle between portrait or landscape version, or if I want to have a free crop, I can just switch back to WH resolution. That way I can just play around and set the crop to whatever size and aspect ratio I need. Let me just accept this crop and show you another image where I would like to change the crop once again, but I am going to use a very interesting feature, which is actually the crop rectangles overlay. By default, it shows us the thirds of the image. You can see whenever we change the crop, it automatically shows these lines which are dividing the image into 3 even sides. So we have 3 here and also 3 rectangles below. Now, the rule of thirds is a very common compositional technique, and that's why the crop tool has this feature, because then you can align certain parts of the image to match the rule of thirds rule, which says that the most interesting parts of an image should always be aligned to these thirds in the image. So instead of having the balloon in the middle, I can also decide to have it slightly on the left edge, or maybe closer to the right edge of the frame. And you see what I'm doing, that I'm using one of the horizontal thirds for the horizon, and then I align the balloon on also one of the vertical thirds. So that can work as a different composition, but I'm going to include the mountains in the background, so I prefer to have the balloon here on the left side, something like that. And it doesn't have to be always exactly aligned, maybe slightly further down, something like that. If I press enter or return, I crop the image based on the rule of thirds. Of course, if you prefer different overlays, you can choose different ones as well. So this is where you can change from rule of thirds to grid or triangle or golden spiral, golden ratio. You can even use the shortcut O while you are using the crop tool to toggle through all these different compositional techniques. Now let me show you another example, because the crop tool can actually be used not only to reduce the canvas area but also to increase it. So if I zoom out a bit from this image by using the Command minus shortcut or Control minus on PC, I can now extend the canvas area by dragging the corner points further out, and you see Photoshop by default will create this white background because I have the background color set to white, which is here in the toolbar. And also this feature works mainly when you have the delete crop pixels turned on. If you don't have that turned on, then Photoshop will just create empty pixels there. So it will have active area, but without having any color information, it will just have it transparent. And this is how Photoshop shows you transparency with these gray and white blocks. So if I press enter, now I manage to increase the canvas size. Of course, there's a better way of doing this if you want to be a bit more precise. So I'm just going to undo this last step and go to image, canvas size. So let's say you know that you need 50 pixels on all the edges, because you want to have like a wide frame or border around the image. Instead of using the original pixel size, I'm going to turn on relative. That way I can type in 100 and 100 for both width and height. And if the anchor is set in the middle, that means the image will grow in every direction with the same amount. So it will split these numbers between left and right and top and bottom. So it will increase 50, 50, 50, 50. And the extension color I can choose, let's say I want it white. So now if I click OK, you will see that's a nice 50 pixel stroke around the original image. And let me just show you, if I wanted to have a little bit more space at the bottom, I can go back and say canvas size, but instead of extending in all directions, I only want to extend to the bottom edge. And if I add for the height, let's say 200 pixels, that will be added only at the bottom. And we created a Polaroid effect very quickly, just by using the canvas size option. You can also use the crop tool to straighten images. Let me show you that in this example. Well, there's a lot of problems with this image. Not only the photograph itself is not straight, but also this water tower needs some straightening. That is something also you can do in Photoshop. You can retouch the tower and straighten it. But for now, all I want is to straighten the actual photograph. So all you need is the crop tool. And then here on the options bar, you have the straighten tool, which once you select, you can then define the horizon by click and dragging over it. You don't have to cover the whole horizon. It's enough if you just cover a part of it. So anything that you know is supposed to be straight, you can draw a line over it. And once you let go, it will straighten. And obviously, it will rotate the whole image and automatically crop it to make sure that you see everything within the image and you won't have any transparent pixels. So if I press return, there's my updated image. So this was before and this is after. I'm just pressing my custom shortcuts F1 and F2 to go back and forth, but you can also use Command Z to step back one step at a time. So So Command Z will go back one step, and one step forward, back and forth, back and forth. And of course, if I would use the straighten tool on the tower itself, so I could use maybe this long vertical pole in the middle as a reference point, then Photoshop would be able to straighten that point of the image. So that way we will have the water tower straight, but all the rest of the image is going to be on an angle. So you can use vertical lines or horizontal lines, whatever you are sure that was originally straight on the image. Let me switch back to the other image we had and show you an alternative version of the crop tool called Perspective Crop Tool, with which you can select an area, let's say this window frame we want to use, but without all the surrounding details. So instead of using the normal crop tool and trying to crop that out of the image, you will find that hard because it's on an angle and it's in perspective as well. So instead of using this tool, I'm going to use the Perspective Crop Tool. Just switch to Perspective Crop Tool, and with this, I'm just going to zoom slightly closer as well. With this, all I need to do is to click on the four corners of this area, defining a plane that I'm going to use, and then once I press return, Photoshop will not only crop but also remove the perspective distortion on this part of the image. This feature is great if you want to save textures from different parts of images, or even if you took a picture of a painting but it was on an angle, you can always get rid of that perspective distortion and have it completely straight facing you. So now that we are familiar with cropping, it is time to talk about probably one of the most important features of Photoshop, and that is the layers panel. So that's what I'm going to show you in the next video. Whenever you work for screen or digital design, you would work with RGB. If you work for print, you will work with CMYK. That's the main difference. But you have to also be aware of the technical difference between them to make sure you know what you're doing. RGB images are the images that you take with cameras, so photographs are always in RGB color mode. Even this image here, if I go to the channels, I can see it's in RGB. I can also tell that by looking at the document tab. It says that it's in an RGB color mode. Now, this is just a simulation here, but I can show the main difference between the two modes is that RGB is usually more vivid. The colors are stronger. While if I print this image out, most likely the printed version will be a little bit faded. So the colors in CMYK tend to fade slightly. The difference between what you see on your screen and what is getting printed is because each of these color modes are completely different how they recreate colors. While RGB uses light, CMYK uses ink. At the bottom here you can see when light is combined, the red, green and blue lights, it will actually turn white, while with ink it works completely the opposite way. When you mix the cyan, magenta and yellow colors together, you end up having black. Here in Photoshop I can also show you this by clicking on the foreground color swatch, and there we can see the color values. So for example, if I select white, that in CMYK terms will be completely 0. So there's no ink needed for white because the paper is already white. But in RGB, that's the full amount. You can see 255 for all RGB values. If I go all the way to the bottom to black, you will see RGB doesn't need anything for that. So think of a dark room. If there's no light, that's completely dark, so black. There we don't need any intensity for any of these torches, so there's no light, it's completely 0. While black has to be created with a very high percentage of all the inks, cyan, magenta, yellow and even black. K stands for black, or the key color in print. And just as an example, a full intensity red would have the red value on maximum, the green and blue on 0, if we are talking about RGB color mode, while the CMYK colors will use no cyan, no black, but a high amount of magenta and yellow. whenever you create a new document, either in Photoshop, Illustrator or InDesign, you always have the option to choose whether you want to work in RGB or CMYK. So once again, remember, you choose RGB if you are working for screen design or digital design, and you use CMYK if you work for print. But you can actually see the difference between the two color modes on your screen if you use Proof View in Photoshop. So currently that's an RGB image and we see it as normal RGB on my screen. But if I go to the View option and choose Proof Colors, that will switch to a simulated version of the CMYK color values. So here on the top you can see it's still in RGB, but I'm proofing it for CMYK. And the way you can change that is by going to Proof Setup under the View menu and choose what you want to proof. These are called ICC color profiles, and actually you can get color profiles for every printer. You can download these and install them, and then you can preview on your screen how an image will look printed out on a specific printer. So once again, if I turn this on and off, that's RGB, and that's the proof view of CMYK. So RGB, CMYK. It shows exactly what I was explaining in the previous example. So now that you understand the difference, I would like to point out one thing, that you should have a synchronized color setting for all three applications, which you can find within Adobe Bridge. Now, this is an application which we are going to talk about in much more detail later on. But for now, I just would like to go to Bridge by going to File, Browse in Bridge, and then here I go to the Edit menu and choose Color Settings. If you set up a setting here, it will be synchronized throughout all your Creative Cloud applications. If you are based in Europe, I would recommend the Europe General Purpose 3 option. But if you turn on Show Expanded List, you will be able to find the other options as well, like Japan and of course North America General Purpose or North America Prepress and so on and so forth. Apart from all this, there's one additional thing to consider, and that is to calibrate your screen. Because it is one thing to set up everything the way I explained, but you will still probably run into issues where colors don't turn out the way you expected. For color calibration, there are many devices, and it's not a big investment, but it will definitely make your work much more professional. Working and understanding layers is one of the most important things in Photoshop, and also in the other Adobe applications. Layers allow us to be able to work non-destructively and to be able to move things around individually. So for example here, this looks like 3 postcards on a wooden background, but we can easily move them separately because they are all separate layers. So you can see here in the layers panel on the right side, we have the panorama, the shelter, and the couple all on separate layers. You can see whenever I select a layer, then using the move tool, I can move that layer around. And there is also a structure of these layers, so some are in front, some are behind each other, and the one on the top is always also on the top here in the layers panel. So the one on the top is closest to you. So if I use that layer, panorama layer, and I use my move tool, I can move that around easily. There's already a very useful shortcut to quickly select a layer by just clicking on it. You have to hold down the command key with the move tool or control on PC, and that will auto select the layer you clicked on. Or you can also right click and then find whatever layers you have under the cursor at the moment. So right now I have the shelter and the background, which is that wooden texture. So whichever you prefer, you can use also instead of going to the layers panel to select the layer. So if I want, I can command click on the panorama and then start moving it around, or even command click and drag to select a layer and immediately start moving it. Remember, this is with the move tool, and if you want, you can even do this without using the shortcut by turning the auto select option on. That way, if you enable that, you can automatically interact with layers by just simply clicking on them, and Photoshop will automatically select whatever you click on. Now this is great in some occasions, but most of the time this might actually select things that you don't want to select. So I prefer to keep this turned off, and I rather use the shortcut command click whenever I want to switch between layers. So just to show you, for example, this layer is selected here in the background, and I would like to keep moving that around. But if auto select is on and I accidentally click here, that will automatically select the panorama. So I have to make sure I click away from the panorama if I want to keep moving that shelter image in the background. So you can see there's many ways to switch between layers. Either select them from the layers panel, or right click and choose which layer you want, or use the auto select option and just simply click on whichever layer you want to move around. Or if you don't have the auto select option on, you can control or command click to switch between layers as well. To change the order of layers, you just simply have to drag them up and down here in the layers panel. So if I have them all, the three images on top of each other, and I want the couple to move on the top, I can drag it all the way on the top. If I want it behind the panorama but in front of the shelter, I can drag it exactly there. And notice there's a line indicating where this layer is going to be placed in. When I let go, it will go exactly between those two layers. And that's what happened here as well. Now if you want to use a shortcut for this, you can use Command or Control square brackets. The end square bracket combined with Command or Control will move it up, and the open square bracket will move it backwards. So you can move it step by step up or back, and you can also make it faster if you hold down Shift as well. So using the same shortcuts but with Shift, you can move a selected layer to the top of your hierarchy or all the way at the back. Now there's one exception, the background layer, which by default is locked. That's my texture, that wooden texture in the background. So that is locked by default, and nothing will go behind that, which makes sense because I don't want to do that. But I'm going to show you how to work with a background layer. How is it different from other layers? For now, I just would like you to practice and remember how to move layers up and down in the layer structure, either by using the shortcut or dragging them up and down here in the layers panel. Remember, you won't be able to drag things underneath a background layer. The furthest down you can drag them is just above the background layer. If you want to select and move multiple layers at the same time, you should hold down the Control or Command key to add to your selection here in the layers panel. So with Command and Control you can add or remove layers from your selection. Now I have all three of these images selected, so I can move them around. If I take away the panorama by using Command or Control click on it, now I will only move the other two layers. You can also show and hide layers by using these eye icons here next to the layers. So with that you can turn on and off layers individually, or you can also quickly turn off multiple layers by click and dragging over the eye icons. That way you can show them or hide them quickly. If you want to see only a single layer without all the other layers, you can Alt click on the eye icon of that layer. That will hide everything, in this case even the background layer. When you don't have the background layer on, you will see transparency. This is how Photoshop shows you transparent background. And if I Alt click again on the eye icon, it shows once again everything. Now hiding and showing layers you can also access from the menus. So if I have the shelter layer selected and let's say I want to hide that, I can go to the layer menu and find hide layers. Or in case you have a layer hidden, it will say show layers. And notice that I added a custom keyboard shortcut for this feature because I use this a lot. Instead of always going to the layers panel, I prefer to be able to turn on and off selected layers by using a shortcut. And my preferred shortcut is F3 to be able to do that. In an earlier video, I already showed how to customize shortcuts. I'm just going to show you where you can find it again. Under the Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, you will be able to find the options that you are looking for. In this case, it's under the Layer menu. So I'm just going there. Make sure you have Applications menu selected here on top. And then you just have to find the command, which will be further down in this list. There's lots of options within the layer menu. So this is where it is. If you just click on it, you can press the button you want to use. I'm using F3, so function 3 keyboard shortcut is what I prefer to use with this. And with that, you can see if I press that, I can show and hide a layer even without going into the layers panel. So in case I have multiple layers selected, I can show and hide multiple layers as well. Now remember the auto select shortcut, the command or control clicking on layers to move them around. You can combine this by using that, selecting a layer and then press F3 to hide it. Command click on another one and hide it. Or if I want to show them again, I have to go back to the layers panel and turn them on. If I want to select multiple layers with the auto select shortcut, you can also command click on one and then command shift click on another one. That would be control shift click on PC. So shift will add to your selection. So I'm having two layers selected now. Command shift click on this, so control shift on PC will also add that to the selection. The same way, with the same shortcut, I can also take away from the selection. So command shift click or control shift click will also take away. So it adds or takes away from the selection. And one last thing you can do with the auto select feature, if you hold down command or control, you can click and drag and highlight layers like this. So whatever falls within that rectangle will be selected. Now I can move all these together. To deselect things, you just command click somewhere else, maybe on the background, which is locked, so you won't be able to select anything there. So that way you can clear your selection. So once again, command click and drag or control click and drag selects whatever falls in the selection. Look at the layers panel at this moment. I have two layers selected. Once I increase my rectangle, the marquee selection, it will include the shelter image as well. When I let go, I can then start moving these together. And if I want to clear my selection, once again, that's command or control click somewhere on the background layer. Now last but not least, let's clarify what is a background layer. So whenever you create a new document, I'm going to File, New, and any document will do, that new document will automatically be created with a background layer. And that background layer will have a specified color. Of course, this can be changed at any point. But what you will see whenever you create a new document is that you already have the background layer there. Now, if you want to move this around, you can, but you can't delete it because you have to have at least one layer in Photoshop. So if you want to move this background layer around, you can click on that lock icon and then you can move it around. In older versions or earlier versions of Photoshop, you would have to double click on the main background to unlock it. In CC, you can just click on that lock icon to leave it. So you see now with the move tool, I can move that white fill around, which is my layer 0 right now. So this is how I converted my background layer into a normal layer. If you want to turn a layer back into a background layer, you will have to go to the layer menu, and under new, you can choose background from layer. Once I select that, it will be again turned into a background layer. And it's also filled in with black here now on the left, because a background layer will always have no transparency. So it will be completely filled. You can't have transparency on a background layer. Let me show you what happens if we open an image from Bridge, or just simply go to File, Open, and find an image on your computer. So if I open this image up, you will see that also automatically comes up as a background layer. So whenever you open images that doesn't have layers already, like JPEG files, PNG files, other file formats as well that doesn't actually have layers, will automatically come up as background layer. The limitation of a JPEG or PNG file is that you can only have one single layer in them. That's why it always automatically comes up as the background layer. Once again, if you want to move that around, just click on the lock icon, or in earlier versions, double click on the background layer and then click OK to accept the conversion, converting this into a normal layer that's free to move around. And don't forget that you can bring in more images into the same document by using the File, Place, Embedded option. That way you can choose another image from your computer, then place it, which will add that image as a new layer. You can just press enter to accept the placement, and then you see this already became a separate layer. And in the layers panel you will see the file name of that layer automatically. And it's also important to know that if you want to keep your layers saved, you have to use file formats that supports layers, like the Photoshop document, which you will find under File, Save As, format set to Photoshop. Or you can also use TIFF, which is a universal version of the Photoshop document, which can be easily opened with any image editing applications. While Photoshop files are more compatible with Adobe products, but most of the time I would recommend to save a Photoshop file version of your work before you save any other file formats. So once again, saving the Photoshop file means that you will be able to open the work back and you will have all your layers available. As long as, of course, you have the layers option selected here. Because you can save a Photoshop file without layers as well, which will automatically flatten that document and will merge all the layers together. But this is all I wanted to show you in this video. In the next video I'm going to talk a little bit more about layers. So before you move ahead, make sure you practice what I showed you in this video, selecting layers, moving them around, hiding, showing them, and changing the order of the layer structure. Apart from placing in images as layers, you can also create empty new layers in Photoshop by using either this little icon here at the bottom of the layers panel, which will create the new layer, or you can use the shortcut Command or Control Shift N, which will come up with this dialog box where you can type in the name of that new layer. Let's just say I'm going to call this Markup or Markups, and I'll click OK. That will create that empty new layer here in the layers panel. Then if I switch to the brush tool, I can start painting on this empty new layer. So let's say I just want to have an arrow pointing at this image at this point here. Then I would like to have another arrow pointing at the couple. So I'm just going to paint this over with the brush tool, like that. And both of these arrows will be in that layer, which I can turn on and off, or even use the move tool to move them around. So whenever you want to create something from scratch, you can use an empty layer in Photoshop. And whenever you decide that you don't need a layer anymore, you can delete it as well, just as easily as you created it. So all you need to do is to click on the trash icon here at the bottom, or press backspace on the keyboard. So that will delete the currently selected layer. But let me undo this last step, so I go to Edit, Undo, or you can press Command or Control Z, which will bring this layer back. Now, another very useful thing to learn is that you can control the opacity of layers. Each layer has an individual opacity setting. So I have a Markups layer selected, and I can reduce the opacity here in the layers panel. And notice what happens, the arrows will become transparent, and after a while they will completely disappear if I drag opacity down to 0%. Now you can also change the opacity even faster by click and dragging on the word opacity. So just click on that and start dragging left and right. Or you can also use the numbers on the keyboard, as long as you have the move tool selected, or any tool that doesn't have its own opacity. But it's good to get used to using the move tool for this. So if you have the move tool selected and you have a layer selected, let's say in this case the panorama layer, I can press 5 on my keyboard to immediately turn it to 50% opacity. If I press 1, that will go down to 10%. 8 would be 80%. If I press 6 and 5, for example, quickly one after the other, it will be 65. For 1%, I can press 0, 1, and for 100% again, I can press 0. 0 would be 0% completely, but instead of using that, you can just use the eye icon if you want to hide something completely, so you don't have to use the opacity for that. There is also another very useful feature called field opacity, which you can use in case you have layer styles in your document, which I actually have on these images here. And This is something I'm going to explain in the next video, but for now I just would like to show you that if a layer has effects, or it's called layer styles, like this stroke and drop shadow on this layer, which I can turn off to see it without that, or turn it back on. If I reduce fill opacity instead of opacity, that can reduce the opacity or visibility of the image without affecting the effects on the layer. So the layer styles can stay intact and only the image's opacity is going to change. So that's what fill opacity is for. Another very useful feature is called lock transparency. That can be used on normal layers like this one, markups, which has the arrows on it. If I turn off all my other layers, you can see everything around that is transparent. If I would continue painting, let's say in this case with another color like black, I can do that quickly by switching to black to make that my foreground color. So if I would start painting, you will see that the paint can go anywhere in the document, not just on top of the arrows that I already have. But if I undo this last step and I turn on the lock transparency option, which will lock transparent pixels within this layer, then when I start painting, notice that I can change quickly the color, for example, of that arrow by painting over it. Okay, so it keeps all the transparent pixels locked, which is a very useful option. So it's a special way of locking the layer. Only the transparent pixels will be locked. So it only allows you to make changes to the already filled details within the layer. And the same way we turn this on, we can also turn it off. And once I do that, I can start again drawing anywhere within the layer. So let me just turn back my other layers. And let me show you also a couple of settings for the layers panel. If you right click on any of the thumbnails, you can see that we have these options here, like clip thumbnails to layer bounds or document bounds. I prefer to use layer bounds, but by default you will see something more like this. The document bounds option is the default setting in Photoshop, which means that every thumbnail will show the whole canvas, and it will show you within the canvas where that current layer is located. But you can also increase and decrease the size of the thumbnails. So let me just make it large so we can see it better. Now you can see exactly what the thumbnails show in case you have the document bounds option on. But if you switch to layer bounds, then you will see only the layer content within the thumbnails, which I prefer because that way I can see even these arrows much clearer than if I have it in a document bounds. So I normally use clip thumbnails to layer bounds, and I normally use small thumbnails just so I can fit multiple layers in my layers panel and I can see them all together. You can also create layer groups, which is another very useful option. So if I were to select multiple layers by Control, Command or Shift clicking to add to your selection, in this case I selected these 3 images, then I can go to layer and choose group layers, or you can also remember the shortcut Command or Control G. Once you do that, it will put all those 3 layers into a layer group, which makes it easier to just select that group and use the move tool to move them around. So in case you want to always move them together or interact with them together, then you can place them in a group. But of course, this group can be renamed as well, so I can call this images, and I can also click on the little arrow to open the group and see what's inside it. So if I want, I can still select these layers individually, but whenever I select the group itself, I can move them also together very quickly. I can even change the opacity of the whole group together. So not individually changing the layer opacity, but changing the whole layer group's opacity. You can also move layers out of a layer group. As you can see now, I only have the other 2 within the group, but the same way I can also drag and drop layers into a group. And if I don't need a layer group anymore, I can just select it, and then from the layer menu I can find ungroup layers, or Control or Command Shift G is the shortcut for that, which will remove the layer group and put the layers back normally as they were in the layer structure. You can even have groups within groups. and layer groups are great for organizing your work. And I'm going to use them in other videos as well, so you will see exactly how they work. Now, last but not least, in this video I would like to also show you that you can merge layers together. So for example, if I select a couple of layers here together, I can then either right click on them and choose merge layers, or I can go to the layers panel menu and choose merge layers from there. You can also choose this from the layer menu here on the top. You will find merge layers, and notice that there is also a shortcut, Command or Control E. Once you do that, the selected layers will be merged together, which means you won't be able to move these apart anymore because they completely are merged. So they became one layer and you lost the flexibility of being able to move them around and changing things easily. The only advantage of merging layers is that the file size will be smaller and it will be faster to work with the document, but I would recommend not to do this. So very rarely do I merge layers together. I prefer to keep everything separate in order to be able to make changes easily. I just go back using the step backward until I get all the layers back. And once again, although I don't recommend to do it, but it's also possible to merge all the layers together, which is called flatten layers. You will also find that from the layer menu, and there's flatten image. So that will automatically merge everything together, and now it will be flattened into the background layer. So once again, that means I can't move things around anymore. Everything is merged into one layer. So this is something you should avoid. Instead, save a Photoshop file with all your layers or a TIFF, and save a separate JPEG file, which will automatically merge and flatten all the layers anyway. Or you can use PNG file format, which will do exactly the same. And although we covered quite a lot now about layers, it's still not enough because we have to talk about special layers, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about in the next video. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to special layers like type, shape, smart and adjustment layers, and we will also learn how to move layers from one document to another, how to rasterize these special layers, and also how to use layer filtering. So to create a type layer, you will need to use the type tool from the toolbar, and you will be able to use different versions of this tool, but most of the time you will need the horizontal type tool. Remember, if you want to show these multiple options, you have to right click or click and hold on a tool. So all you need to do once you have the type tool selected is to click anywhere on the canvas and start typing. So I'm just going to type in Photoshop for this example. Once you have your text, you can select it and make it bigger by selecting a higher point size, or you can also scrubby change it by click and dragging the icon for the font size. Of course, you can then use the move tool as well to move this text layer around, because notice that we have a new layer created for the type. So that's the type layer, and that's how you create this special type of layer. So if you want to edit the text, you can double click on the T icon here in the layers panel. That will automatically select the text within that layer. And of course, you can change all kinds of different things. The color is here, and we can change the color, for example, very quickly. You can also do other edits, like changing the font itself, but I'm going to talk about these in more detail in another video. For now, I would like to also make sure you know that if you just click on this tick here on the top, that means you accept the changes to your text, or you can cancel the changes. I'm just going to click on this to accept the color change. So every time you use the type tool and you click on an empty part of your canvas, it will automatically create a new type layer. The same way if you use shape tools, which are here not far from the type tool, they will also create automatically a new shape layer. So if I choose the rectangle tool and I click and drag, that's going to create a default rectangle, which has no fill, just a black stroke around it. But you see, this is the new layer here in the layers panel, and it indicates that this is a shape layer with that little icon next to the thumbnail, on top of the thumbnail. The same thing would happen if I use the ellipse tool, for example. Click and drag, I can create an ellipse, which will automatically be called ellipse 1 in my layers panel. So these are shape layers, and they have their own setting as well within the properties panel. And then there is the smart objects, which you can actually create from anything within Photoshop. But to show you an example, I'm going to place in an image by using File Place Embedded, and we will pick one of these images. So let's just place that in. I'm going to click on Accept, but before I do that, I want to resize this image quickly. If you want to resize without messing up the proportions of a placed image, you can just click on the chain here on the top, and then you can drag it down using one of the corner points. Don't use the side points because that still will distort the image. Just use the corner points. Clicking on the image itself, you can move it around, and then when you're happy with the size of it, you can accept it by pressing Enter or click on the Commit Transform icon there on the top. So the image we placed in is automatically becoming a smart object. The way I can tell again is by looking at the layer's thumbnail. It has that little icon which indicates that this is a smart object. I'm going to talk about smart objects also in much more detail. So for now, all I want you to remember is these are also not normal layers that you would create as an empty layer. These are smart objects, a special type of layer. There is actually a preference with which you can decide whether you want the images placed to become smart objects or not. It will be under the Preferences General or Edit Preferences General if you are a PC user, and here you can see Always Create Smart Objects when Placing. That's the option you have to turn off if you want incoming images to become normal layers and not smart objects. Once again, the advantages of smart objects I'm going to explain in a separate video. So far it's enough to know where this option is and that smart objects are different to normal layers. So there's one last type of special layer called adjustment layer, which you can create either from this little icon here at the bottom, which will give you a list of all the different type of adjustment layers, or you can go to the window menu, choose adjustments, and that will open up the adjustments panel. Now just like with any other panels, this can be moved anywhere, maybe above here the layers panel is where normally it is, and then you can see icons for all these adjustment layers. And what I would like to use now is the black and white adjustment layer. So once I click on that, that again creates a new layer, and as long as that's on top of all the other layers, everything will be turned black and white. So the way this works, if I move it down one below the image, then the image won't get affected by this adjustment anymore because the adjustment layer is underneath that layer. If I move it all the way down, even below the text, then the text again won't get affected because now only the background layer is underneath the black and white adjustment layer. Also notice that whenever you have an adjustment layer selected, the Properties panel will show you additional features or options for the current adjustment. Let me select one of my shape layers, in this case the rectangle layer, and from the Properties panel I'm going to choose a color for that layer, and then I'm going to select the ellipse layer and also choose a fill color for that other layer, like that. Now the Properties panel is available in Photoshop CC, but you won't be able to do this in previous versions. So if you have an older version of Photoshop, you have to double click on the thumbnail of a shape layer and then choose the color there. Once you have a fill color applied, you can also use this way of changing the color here in Photoshop Creative Cloud. So if I pick another color, you see it will update on the shape. So as long as you have a fill color already, you can use this technique by double clicking on the thumbnail and changing the color like that. When you have the color picker open, you can even click on the image in the background to sample colors from that, which is also quite useful. So just to make sure you understood, the adjustment layer can be moved around within the layer structure, and whatever falls underneath it will be affected, and whatever is on top of it won't get affected by it. I'm going to talk a lot about adjustment layers in separate videos. So for now, I just wanted you to understand these type of special layers. So we talked about text layer, which we have here, or type layer. Then we have shape layers. We have adjustment layers and also smart objects. Now, once again, in Photoshop Creative Cloud, we have layer filtering options. So in case you only want to see pixel layers, for example, you can turn this option on, which in this case will only show our background layer here in the layers panel. So you won't see any of the other layers. That doesn't mean it will hide the other layers, just simply that you won't see them listed in the layers panel. So if I turn that off, I can see them again. If I click on this icon here, I will only see all the adjustment layers in my layer structure. Then the same again with type layers or shape layers or smart objects. And you can even have multiple options on. So that way you can very quickly isolate and filter for specific type of layers. This will become very useful once you have loads of different layers in a document and you want to quickly find some of the types of layers and make changes to only those. Of course, you can do filtering not just by kind of layers, but also by the name of layers. So if I'm looking for, let's say, ellipses, I can start typing that and it will immediately filter for all layers, including this in their name. And you have also effect, mode, attribute, and so many other options here, which I won't go into detail for now. I just wanted to make sure you understand that you can filter for layers. And one last and very important thing is that you can turn any special layer into a normal layer. Normal layer we also call pixel layer. So while this ellipse layer is a special vector shape layer, it can be rasterized by right-clicking on it and choosing rasterize layer, which means it won't be a shape layer anymore. If I check the properties panel, you won't see any properties for this layer. So there's no special options for it. The same thing with a type layer. If I have that type selected, we can see that it has all the options here on the top to be able to change the text. We can change the size, the font, and so on and so forth. But if I right click on that layer and choose rasterize type, then it becomes again a normal layer which won't have those options. So this layer, I can't make any changes anymore to the text itself because it became a rasterized pixel layer. And last but not least, I would like to show you how you can move layers between documents. So currently you can see I have multiple documents open. The layers PSD, this untitled document, and the other which was an image on which I moved or placed another image. So let's say I want to move this image with the C onto my untitled document. So there's two ways of doing it. First of all, you will have to use the move tool and select the layer from the layers panel that you want to move, or command click on it. Remember, that's another way of doing it. Control clicking on PC, which will select the layer automatically, and then you can start dragging the layer all the way up until your mouse hovers over the other documents tab. Don't let go the mouse, then you just move down. You won't see the image, only when you let go it will appear. And you can see this one is a very big high resolution image, and because it's under the black and white adjustment layer, it automatically turns black and white. But if I were to move this above all the other layers, then of course it will hide everything that was originally here in this composition. So that is one way to move layers between documents. But there's also another way. If you go to the window menu and choose arrange, tile, all vertically or horizontally, you will be able to see all your currently open documents at the same time. That way, if I go into a document and select an image like this one here, I can then drag it over another document to be able to place it in there. I can also drag this now over to this document to be able to place it into that document. And once you are ready moving things around, if you want to concentrate on working on a specific document, you can go to Window, Arrange, and choose Consolidate All tabs. Once you selected that, see we are back to the normal editing mode, and the other two documents are collapsed into tabs. You can still find them here on the top, but we are concentrating on this specific document. So now we actually know about all the different type of layers that you can create in Photoshop, but we still have to learn how to use layer styles. And that's what I'm going to show you in the next video. Layer styles are effects that you can apply to your layers. You can access them by double-clicking on a layer or going down to the bottom of the layers panel and clicking on the FX icon, from which you get a list, and you can choose whichever effect you would like to apply. So let's say we would like to apply a drop shadow for one of these images. So once I click on that, that will bring us to the layer style dialog box, which is really big. So I always prefer to move this to the side so I can see what's happening in the background. When you select the drop shadow option, you will get all the attributes and properties of this effect. But instead of changing the values here, you can also just click and drag the shadow around in the actual document window. So you can adjust the angle and the distance by doing that. And then you can decrease the opacity to make it more intense or make it less strong on the image. And then you can also use the size. If you reduce the size, then you get a very sharp edge for the shadow. If you increase it, you can blur the shadow out. So that's how you use the drop shadow in a nutshell. But then you can also add other effects. Let's say stroke. Now, whenever you add multiple effects, make sure you don't just simply tick that box there, but also click on the word, because that way you get the options as well. So here, for example, with stroke, we can change the color of the stroke. I'm going to use white, and let's change the position to inside, and then we can also change the size so it's not so thick, something like that. Once you are ready with setting up your effects, you can click OK, and you will notice the effects will be there in the layers panel, and you can turn them off or back on, or you can also turn them off individually, and you can double click on any of these effects to go back and make changes to them. So they are completely editable at any time. An interesting feature which was introduced in Photoshop CC is that some of the effects can actually be duplicated. So for example, we can have multiple strokes on the same image. If I change the color to something else, let's say we pick a color from this image here, and I'm going to increase the size of that, then you might notice that we only see one of these effects, but because the thicker one is on top, that's why we don't see the other one. You just have to click on this arrow here to move an effect down, and you can see now we have two strokes. We have the white one, and we have this magenta color that I just picked from the other image. Wherever you see a plus sign, that means those effects can be duplicated, so you can use multiple versions of them on the same layer. Don't look for this in previous versions. This is again only available in Photoshop CC. Now, if I go back to my layers, I just click OK, then I can copy this effect from one layer to another by Alt-click and dragging the FX icon. If I do that, all the effects will be copied. If I don't hold down the Alt, just simply drag the FX icon from one layer to another, then I just move the effects, so remove it from the previous layer and move it onto this one. And you can also separately move effects between layers, like this drop shadow, I can just drag and put it onto the other layer there. If you go to the window menu and open styles, that is the panel where you can save your settings. So I have this image selected, and I click on new style. I can call this whatever I want, double stroke and shadow, for example. And you see we have an option here, add to my current library as well, which is only in Creative Cloud version of Photoshop. If I click OK, it's not only saved in the layer styles panel, but also in the libraries panel. So if I go to window, libraries, it will also be there. So you can see there's the double stroke style saved. Why is that useful? Well, this styles option might not be always available in other documents, But as long as it's saved into your libraries, you will always be able to find it from this panel in any of the document, and even other computers. As long as you log into your Creative Cloud account, you will be able to find all your saved layer styles. Let me also show you another interesting feature. If I go into the drop shadow option, you can see that we have a feature here called Use Global Light. Now, when I start changing the angle of my shadows, it not only changes on the currently selected layer, but it changes on all the layers that uses drop shadow, or any effects that would have an angle feature. So as long as the Use Global Light is selected, the angle and the distance of shadows and all these light effects will be all linked and connected, which makes everything look more realistic. So imagine the shadows going all kinds of different ways, different length, then it won't look natural. It won't feel like there is a light source that casts these shadows from the objects. So Use Global Light is definitely a useful feature. And I would like to also make sure you know that you can use layer styles on groups. So if I select these 3 layers and go to layer group layers, or Command G, which puts them all into a group, then instead of having the effects on the individual layers, we can drag the effects onto the group itself, and then I can right click on these other layers within the layer group and clear the layer styles, because we don't need to have them twice. Now we have all the effects here on the group, so I can turn it on and off, and you see all 3 layers are affected by these layer styles. So if you want to use the same style, instead of duplicating it, just put everything in a group and apply the effects on the group itself. And as long as the images are within that group, they will be affected. As soon as I move it outside of the group, you see now it doesn't have those effects. But once I put it back, again, it will receive the layer style from the layer group. And that's all you really need to know about layer styles in Photoshop. So in the next video, I'm still talking about layers, but we will cover another very interesting feature called blend modes. Once you start using layers and multiple images combined together, you will realize that sometimes you want to have some sort of interaction between the layers. And one of the best and easiest way to achieve that is by using the blend modes in the layers panel. So let me show you a very simple example. We have this very dramatic shot here with the firefighters and the smoke in the background. But let's say I want to make this look even more dramatic. So I want the edges to be almost like burnt or add some grunge to it. So for that, I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Place Embedded. And I downloaded a few images already, like this one here called Grunge Frame. And once I choose Place, it will be placed on top of this original image. And I'm going to make this as big as my frame. So I'm going to extend it out completely. And I'm not worried about the distortion here, because it's just a simple texture. But by default, you can see this one doesn't have any transparency, so it has white details in the middle and the black burnt edges all around. Now, instead of reducing the opacity, which could be also one way to blend these 2 images together, there's a much better way to do it. I will keep it on 100% opacity, and instead I just go to the option here in the layers panel called Normal. That's the list of blend modes or blending options we have. And in these cases, if I want to keep the dark details visible but hide all bright details from this black and white image, I can use Multiply. With Multiply, I get exactly what I wanted, so I keep the dark details from this layer on top, and only those will be blended onto the image below. And everything that was white or really bright will be completely transparent. How amazing is that? So let's try this on another image. I'm going to go to another nice photograph, and I will go to File, Place, Embedded, and choose this other one here called Grunge Frame White. So let's place that in here. And this is slightly different. And by the way, you can find these textures on Google easily. If you just search grunge texture or grunge frame or any kind of keyword that you think you will be able to use for your projects. I'm sure you will be able to find things like this, download them, and then you can start using them in your compositions. If I were to use multiply on this, remember multiply adds dark details, then this is what's going to happen. We will only see whatever was white on this image. So this is not perfect because I want to obviously see the image itself, and I only want to see this effect around the edges. So instead of multiply in this case, I'm going to use screen. Screen is another blend mode which is also very useful. In that case, anything that was white will be still visible, and all the dark details, the black details in our case, will be completely transparent. So you can remember screen as the opposite of multiply. But what if you want to use black on the frame? With the same texture, you would like to invert it. Well, very simple. All you need to do is to go to the image menu, and under adjustments you can choose invert. So once you do that, it inverts the colors, and then you can switch back to multiply. So in case you work with black and white textures, it's very easy. You just have to invert the colors and then decide which one you want, the multiply or the screen blending option. Just as a side note, I would mention that with Photoshop CC, you will get the invert as a smart filter, which can be turned on and off, as you can see. And that way I can just turn it off and go back to screen to be able to swap between the two options. Or once again, I can turn it back on and switch back to multiply, whichever fits what I would like to create. But if you have earlier versions like CS6 and your placed images come in as smart objects, you won't be able to use invert directly on the smart object. You would have to first right click and rasterize your smart object texture, and then you will be able to use invert. And by the way, invert is it has a shortcut, it's Command or Control I, so that's also useful to know. And last but not least, let me show you one more blend mode. I'm going to bring in another image, so once again, File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to choose this one, Paper Texture. So let's place that on top of this as well. I'm going to also make it completely covering up the whole canvas. Press Enter. And for this layer, I'm going to choose not the multiply, not screen, but I'm going to use overlay. That's my third favorite blend mode, which is somewhere between the two options. So it not only blends the dark details, but also the bright details on the image. So let's see without the grunge frame. And I'm going to turn off the paper texture that was before. This is after. So you can see that all the tonal values, the colors of the paper texture are now merged onto or blended onto the image in the background. When I move it around, you can see exactly how this layer is blended into the image behind it. Okay, so overlay, you can remember it as somewhere between multiply and screen, but mainly remember it that you can use it well when you want to also blend colors. So when it's not just black and white details, but colors, like any textures that can create some kind of grid or atmosphere on your images. And of course, you can combine multiple blending options as well. Just like here, you can see now I have an overlay with my paper texture and a multiply blend mode with my grunge frame. And this is really just scratching the surface because you can see how many different blend modes we have here. What I recommend is to play around with them and notice that they are grouped. So there's a group for multiply, they are very similar. There's another group for screen, also they are very similar, and these are also quite similar in the effect to overlay. So you can remember multiply, screen and overlay as the main blend modes, and then there's alternative versions of them, and there's some special blend modes as well further down in the list. I'm going to talk more about these later, but for now that's all I wanted to show you about blend modes. And with that, we covered almost everything you need to know about layers. Anything else that will be still in the layers panel, like masking, smart objects and selections, But in our next video, we are going to focus on another very important aspect of working in Photoshop,